just going to show you how to make a simple bead. Just put on your shades to protect your eyes. Just medium strength UV filtered shades are fine for Murano glass or soft glass. If you're going to use borosilicate or other types of glass, you need a darker shade. But for Murano glass, it's not too bright. It melts at about 1200 to 1500 degrees C, depending on the colors. So this is a mandrel. It's stainless steel. I make my own ones out of stainless steel welding rods. I think this is 2 mil, something like that. And then I dip it into a ceramic slurry or ceramic paste called bead release. Everybody does it. It's the way you make beads. And you dip the mandrel into the bead release so that the glass doesn't stick to the mandrel. The glass doesn't stick to the steel. And once the bead's cool, you can the ceramic paste becomes loose and you can pull the bead off the mandrel. So you heat the tip of your glass rod until it's liquid, and then you put a series of wraps onto the mandrel in order to form the base of your bead. Everybody has a different way of doing it, but the basic principle is the same. I like to build up a series of wraps. Other people like to put one long wrap on. But essentially you need to get the rod of glass hot and keep the bead that you're building up hot, somewhat hot, and then build up your layers. You don't want the bead to be hotter than the rod, because then it's more likely that the glass from the bead will stick to the rod instead of the other way around. You want the liquidy glass of the rod to stick to the base of your bead. So like there's a basic start for a bead made out of a nice blue, periwinkle blue. So now I'm going to let that cool and at the same time heat up another color so that I can add decoration. So you always start with the base and then you add whatever layers of color on top of the colored base. So I'm waving the rod in and out of the flame initially so that the rod doesn't shock and crack. And so basically it's a way of heating it up slowly, just to get it accustomed to the heat before I actually go and heat the tip up to a red hot until it starts to get liquidy and melt. So I'm going to add a dot of color, another one opposite the blue. You'll get green when you look through the dot. And then also colors can change a lot when they cool. So the rod might look like one color, then when it gets hot it looks like another color, and then when the bead is finally cold at the end of the whole process, it'll look like a third color. So you have to get used to your glass. It's kind of alchemy in a lot of ways, the way the chemistry of the flame changes the oxides in the glass, because the color in all glass comes from oxides of various metals. So the nicest translucent reds come from gold oxide, for example. Blues come from copper oxide and cobalt oxide. But the flame on these nice quiet and very, very hot torches is a mixture. It comes from a mixture of two gases, oxygen and propane. It's a much nicer, hotter flame. You can make beads in just single gas torches, like just propane torches, but they're very noisy, and also the flame's not hot enough, so you don't have the control. But with these, you can actually change the chemical composition of the flame. If you add more oxygen, you get an oxidizing flame, which will add oxygen to the colored glass and change the color of the glass itself. It creates a chemical process. And if you take out the oxygen and add more gas, you get a reducing flame which sucks oxygen out of the glass, out of the molecular structure of the glass, and you get a different color. So reduction in oxidization can be beneficial or detrimental. For example, if you want a nice red, but you have too much gas in your flame, the color will reduce into an ugly brown. So that's a detrimental effect of reduction. On the other hand, you can get these blacks that reduce into like a mirror silvered finish, which is very, very nice. So it just depends on how you use the alchemy of the heat mixed with the oxides and the silica, which create the glass. So now I've got all my dots there, and I'm going to trap a bubble to create a nice visual effect. So I'm going to use the turn. You see I turned my flame down, and I'm going to use a little tungsten rod to poke holes to. So I'm going to heat up the glass locally, just in specific areas, and then poke a hole in those specific areas. And the hole is going to be where I trap the bubble. So if I make a hole in the glass and then let it cool, that dent I'm going to put clear on top of the dent, and the clear will trap the bubble there, and it'll look quite spectacular. So the lamp working or flame working, this type of glass work was initially called lamp work because they did it with oil lamps and bellows. So it must have taken ages to get enough heat into your glass, because they used oil. I'm not quite sure what type. It would have been some sort of organic oil. I'm sure they had their favorites, whether it was nut oil or rapeseed oil or sunflower oil. So you can see the holes there now. And I'm going to trap air in. So I'm going to use a clear rod. You notice that I always keep my bead somewhat hot in the flame. I can't just keep it out of the flame the whole time because it will crack. But if I put it in the flame all the time or too much, I'll lose the shape and I'll lose my pattern. So once I've developed the base of the bead, then I just keep it hot while I'm adding colors and adding layers. And of course everything's turning the whole time because it's liquid. So a bit like the ceramic artists, if you keep it turning, it's going to keep it round, except it's kind of like a pottery wheel on its side. Like a pottery wheel would be like that, but we do it on the side. So there's a nice big blob of clear, which is going to turn into a sort of a lens. Another one. So if you want a large dot, you can wind off the glass by putting it onto it and then winding it off like that. You get more glass, and of course the more of the rod you heat up initially, the more of it's going to transfer to the bead. So what was I saying? Yeah, so the Venetians invented lamp work. So it's often called lamp work, but then of course we've got modern torches, and it's now called flame work because you're working in a flame rather than in a furnace. It's to distinguish this type of glass work from the type where you have a big furnace full of molten glass and you gather it out of that furnace with a blowpipe. Generally furnace work is for larger objects, whereas flame work is for smaller, more intricate objects. Although you can do fairly substantial work with flame work generally using borosilicate glass because it's less susceptible to thermal shock. So you can have one part of the borosilicate piece in the flame and another part out of the flame, and it's less susceptible. Look at those lenses, it looks like some sort of jellyfish type creature. So I'm going to melt all of those in and hopefully create some sort of unique bead. Okay. A little larger than I was expecting, probably because I was chatting. But the beauty of glasswork is you never ever make the same thing twice, even if you try to. It's working with a liquid is so in the moment. You can't stop and go have a cup of tea and come back because the glass will have cracked. You have to do it all at once. So once you get the glass hot, you have to persevere to the end of your creation and then put it in the cooling bubbles to cool down slowly, or in the annealer to cool down slowly. So you never really know what you're going to get, and even if you want the same thing again, chances are you'll never be able to recreate what you created in that one moment, which is kind of nice, or maybe frustrating if you have something that you really want to do again. This came out completely different to what I was expecting, which is often the case with glass. I think it's going to be quite nice. So now I'm just going to let it cool down, because at the moment if I put it in those cooling beads, the beads will stick to the glass because the glass is still tacky. I think it's going to be quite a superb bead actually. So I'm just letting it cool enough so that the surface is not tacky. And I'm going to put it in the glass.